Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. Visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. You know, I just looked at this and I just forgot it. We're going to continue our video series here, knife edge retention tips, and we're going to be on number 12, steel types. I know you guys have been waiting for this, right? You've had to suffer through 11 videos on personal skills with a knife. The edge finish that you think might work best for your knife, that will give you the highest or the longest lasting working edge. You know, your sharpening skills, your stone choice, your different techniques in sharpening, all corrosion, all this kind of stuff. And you probably wanted to just know, hey Joe, does 5160 hold a better edge than 440C stainless, and which one of them is, how does that relate to S30V, and does S30V, is it good as Maxim something or other, right? Guys, I don't know. All right, what I will tell you, that the steel type or the steel choice honestly does not make as much difference as the guy that made it. Okay, now whether it was the guy that made it or it was the factory that made it, whatever, right? Now here's where I'm going with this. You guys know I only work in a small handful of steels. I work in 1095 high carbon, I work in 440C stainless, 5160, 52100, occasionally W1, mostly for straight razors, and a Damascus mix of 1095 or 1084 and 15N20. Very occasionally I'll do like a powder Damascus type deal, you know, like a can type of setup where you make a can and you fill it up with like ball bearings or fish hooks or, you know, steel lock washers or whatever, and then you pour in powdered steel on top of that, weld the can up, forge weld it, and then draw it out and make whatever you want out of it. And that's really cool and everything. But the reason that I only make knives out of a handful of steels is because that's honestly all I can keep track of in my head. Okay, and sometimes I wonder if I've got too many. All right. When you go to a guy or a factory or whatever that only works in a handful of steels, you can typically bet that if that guy or that factory is dedicated to a performance type product or an honest type product, that they're probably going to know an awful lot about that steel type. Okay, if you ask me who is the best supplier for 1095, I will tell you straight up, I buy my 1095 from two different places. Jantz knife making, the knife supply house, okay, and I buy it from Admiral Steel. That's the only two places that I will buy 1095 from. And you might say, well, what about this guy or what about this guy? And I can say, well, I don't really like to speak bad of folks, but I would not buy from this guy and I would not buy from this guy. Or I might just say, hey, I only buy my steel from these two places because these two places are the best suppliers that I know of, okay? And the reason for that's because I've bought steel from other people and I didn't really care for it. And these two guys were the best ones, okay? Which means that I only buy steel from those two places. They're the only two places that I trust my reputation from 1095 on, okay? I'm not going to buy 1095 from the guy down the street saying, hey, this is 1095 because, you know, I bought it from so-and-so, he bought it from so-and-so, he bought it from so-and-so, and he bought it from so-and-so, and that guy is now out of business and doesn't really care, you know, what the finished product is, right? You know, those people give me the same steel over and over, year after year, year after year, year after year. Now, compare that to the guy who's chasing the latest and the greatest steels, all right? The newest steel comes out. Hey, everybody's got to have that newest steel. So he goes out and he gets that newest steel from wherever he can find it from, right? Then he makes a knife out of it, and he hardens it to 64 Rockwell because, by golly, the chart says 64 Rockwell. That's the hardest that you can get. Well, what happens at 64 Rockwell? Is it stable at 64 Rockwell? Would it be a little bit more stable at 63 Rockwell? Would it be, you know, a little bit harder at 65, but still not quite as stable? How do you know? I mean, has that guy tested that many knives out of that newest, latest, and greatest steel? Usually the latest and greatest steels are the most highest dollars, which means that the higher dollar steel, the guy's going to be like, well, hey, I don't want to waste all this steel, because you don't get paid for the test knives, right? When you're working up a new heat treat for a new steel, you don't get all that. You might break a dozen knives, and then you finally come up with something that you think might be working pretty good. So you make a pocket knife out of it, and you carry that knife for 6 months. After the end of the 6 months, you're like, man, this stuff really just doesn't live up to its claim, right? All those knives that you made and broke and tested, you don't get paid for it, okay? That knife that you carried for 6 months until you finally found out that, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or no, this isn't the greatest thing since sliced bread. You didn't get paid for any of that time. That goes into the pocketbook, or the experience pocketbook of the maker who made that knife, right? And the latest and greatest, as far as what I've kind of seen and what I've kind of heard around places, folks just don't test those newer steels as much or as often as they should before they release them to the public. Now, after a while, after a steel type has been out for a while and folks have tested it and they've said, okay, well, yes, the book says let's heat treat it to 64. And guys have been around for a while and they said, okay, well, I've heat treated some to 64, I've heat treated some to 63, I've heat treated some to 65. This is kind of where I'm at, and this is what I suggest and why. And here are the pile of knives behind me to back it up. All right? Now you're talking. Now you can say, okay, once you have that experience with that steel type, now you can go ahead and start making knives out of it and selling it to the general public, and have a pretty good understanding of how that steel type's going to work. Honestly, that's why I don't chase the latest and the greatest new steel type, because there's always, this is the latest and greatest today. 6 months from now, that shit's old news, and this one is the newest, latest, and greatest. If you keep chasing the newest, latest, and greatest, that big old pile of test knives that you have to make and break and test and everything, and you never get paid for it, that's just the way it is. Steel types like 1095, 5160, 52100, those steels have been around for a long, long time. The factories have got their processes and their recipes for those steels. They've got them down to a science. There's very, very rarely any kind of big surprises. Sure, occasionally you'll have a screw up here and there, whether that was the guy that melted the steel down, which is really rare, or maybe it was you in the knife as a knife maker. Maybe you were having a bad day. Maybe the guy in the production line was having a bad day, and you got a bad knife. Occasionally it happens, but with the older steels, it's pretty rare. Anyway, so that's kind of my take on steel type as it goes to edge retention tips. The steel type, like I said, this is the 12th video for a reason. Okay, all that other 11 tips were way more important than the steel type. When you do want to go to a steel type, we got a minute and a half. You can pick that as in you want high carbon steel, or if you want stainless steel. All right. Me here in Cheyenne, we've got very low humidity. You've really got to work hard to get things to rust. I really like the crispness and the cleanness of edges that I get off of high carbon steels. Run to their maximum working hardness. If I lived in a place that was more humid, or near the ocean with salt water and everything, or if I was wearing a knife that was going to be close to my body and I sweated on it a lot, I would go with stainless. Other than that, pick the steel type based on the reputation of the maker or the factory that made the knife, and then go back to those 11 steps before when it comes to your edge retention tips. Work the knife, sharpen it, practice your sharpening, practice your knife use techniques, pick a good stone, all that sort of stuff. So again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery, and visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time.